Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Maine Take. My name is Dana Connors, and I'm pleased to be a host of this weekly program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. Each week, we take a look at the issues, the initiatives that are at work in our state, hoping and helping to serve our people as well as our economy. And when you think of it, the people and our economy are priorities that unite all of us, regardless of where you live or what you do or what your politics are. And while we can agree on the goal, we don't always agree on how to get there. What are the means? What are the priorities that it will take to serve the economy and our people? Well, those are some of the questions that brings us to today's first segment. Today, we're going to look at the second session of the 130th legislature. It is appropriately called the short session because when you think of it, in duration, it's 3.5 months ending in mid-April and not 5.5 months as the first session is ending in mid-June. It's also shorter, I should say, because of the number of bills under consideration. 300, 200 of which are carryovers from the first session. And in the first session, not 300 or 350, it's 1,700 or 1,750. But as much as that is considered to be the reason for the short session, don't be fooled, because it isn't necessarily a session that's short on issues that carry an impact. And sometimes that impact can be positive and help our economy grow and serve our people. Or conversely, the impact may be of a negative nature that stands in the way of progress. Well, to help sort that out and to talk about those questions and the issues that are before this session, I have the pleasure of welcoming back our advocacy team here at the State Chamber. First of all, Peter Gore, our Vice President, who looks at those HR issues that are always prominent or have been in the last few sessions. We also have Linda Corpera, who manages and looks after the taxation issues as well as budget items that the Appropriations Committee deals with. And our newest addition, which I'm pleased to present, who's been with us for a while now, is Ben Lucas. Ben will oversee the energy utilities technology as well as environment and natural resources. And if that's not enough, we've also asked him to watch out for that important committee, the Education Committee. So guys, what I'd like to do is recognizing that this, once again, committees are by Zoom. And even though our legislative body had been in twice in January, not much occurred. Yes, a veto was sustained and a lot of nominations were taken care of. And there's only 3 days in February, one of which is this Thursday, in which the governor's state of the state will be presented. But let's take a look at the committee structure and tell us what bills have been discussed, debated, moved out of committee so far that you would like to bring to the attention of our public. Peter, let's start with you.
Thanks, Dana. Well, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, there are still two issues that are most prominent in my policy world in the Labor and Housing Committee. Both have been taken up in work sessions and both have been voted on, partisan votes, 8-5 with Democrats supporting and Republican opposing. LD 225 is the bill that will require employers, whether they have a policy in place or not, to cash out any unused vacation time when the employee leaves the employer's business. That bill, I think some of the issues can be worked out in it, but whether we'll get a chance to do that or not, I'm not quite sure. The second and more problematic bill is LD 607, and that's a bill that increases the salary threshold that divides salaried employees from hourly employees. In Maine, we've tied that to the minimum wage for the past 20 years. So anytime the minimum wage has gone up, the salary threshold has gone up because there's a multiplier in the law, and it's 3,000 times the state's minimum wage. LD 607 proposes to increase the multiplier over 3 years, getting to 4,500 by 2025. What does that mean? Well, in Maine right now, our minimum wage is $12.75 an hour. It's indexed annually as required by the referendum that passed in 2016 at the ballot box. So that's roughly a 6% increase in the minimum wage in 2022 over 2021. And as a result, our salary threshold increased to $38,250. Should be noted, the federal salary threshold is a little above $35,000. Well, at 4,500 times the state's minimum wage, even assuming there are no more increase in the minimum wage between now and 25, and there most certainly will because inflation is up, that gets us to a salary threshold of about $57,000, which is the highest in the country. Only 6 states adjust their salary threshold independent from the federal level. So this would really make us an outlier. It would increase the cost of doing business here. It would disrupt the workplace. It would impact the morale of salaried employees who would suddenly find themselves as hourly employees. And it would really disrupt a production at a time when there's already a workforce shortage. Employers would have to take back cell phones and laptops so people wouldn't work past 40 hours in a week, and they wouldn't incur overtime costs or the threat of a wage and hour violation because somebody worked and perhaps didn't talk about the fact that they were working beyond 40 hours. It's a very problematic piece of legislation. We have opposed it strongly. There's a coalition of more than 40 different business associations against the bill. And as problematic as it is for private sectors, Dana, and for-profit employers, I really want to emphasize the impact this will have on nonprofit businesses. They have the least amount of headroom to deal with this kind of increase at the salary threshold. And I've heard from individual nonprofits who have indicated to me if this passes, they'll close their doors. So we're urging folks to oppose this bill and let their legislators know that they should vote no on LD 607.
Yeah, clearly a challenge that will be hard to deal with and still move the economy forward. So Linda, do you want to go to those issues that are in play today that are of concern to you or of value to the economy?
Absolutely. Well, the Taxation Committee last week moved out LD 1289, which was the last remaining income tax bill. It would have increased the individual income tax top rate from 7.15 to 7.95. So they voted out not to pass on that, thank God. That was the last of the last. Couple bills very problematic that today we testified on LD 1941 in opposition. This deals with the Maine seed capital tax credit. This bill would reduce the current credit from 40 to 30%. This credit's used to attract venture capital from outside of Maine into Maine. It would really impact, this program is working. It's attracted a number of entrepreneurs, small businesses, startups to Maine. Why change this? The legislature really, over the years, this rate and these annual caps that associate with this credit have been really decreased, increased. We testified today we need stability and predictability here. So that was LD 1941. They're going to be working this bill next week. Couple bills very problematic. LD 1337. This is the second home tax in Maine. What this bill would do is allow municipalities through an ordinance to impose an impact fee, or we call it a tax, on second homes in Maine. 3 out of 4 second homes in Maine are owned by Mainers. This gets at the heart of Mainers. Their camps, this is another tax, property tax. Don't let anybody kid you. So we are strongly opposed to this. And the fact that a municipality can do this through an ordinance is even more problematic. Another bill, LD 1129, this is called the Dark Stores Bill. What this bill does as amended, this was reported out as well. Basically, it would allow assessors to value improved real property at the highest and best use. So think about if you have a vacant commercial property somewhere. they could look at that property and say, you know what, that could be turned into a hotel. So let's value it at the highest and best use. Huge property tax increases potentially with this legislation. And this passed the committee. So we're going to be monitoring these, and we're going to be, a coalition is going to be forming on LD 1129, because this is just, it's going to change the landscape of Maine, and we don't want that. So Dana.
Thanks, Linda. Ben, the floor is yours, as we say.
Yeah, thanks, Dana, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll start. So the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, they have been working through bills in a much faster manner than the EUT committee. EUT committee still has about 22 bills that they're going to need to work between now and April 20th, which is statutory adjournment. But I'll highlight a couple bills that have already been acted on. Two to start with, LD 383 and 1532. These are two bills. One was dealing with small wireless facilities in the state of Maine. That bill was voted ought not to pass, which the chamber testified in opposition. So that was a good outcome. And the other one was LD 1532. This was a problematic carryover that we highlighted dealing with air emissions licensing standards. It would have changed the law from being every 10 years for relicensing to every 2 years. So we were strongly opposed to that bill in the first session. And thankfully, early on in this legislative session, the ENR committee voted unanimously ought not to pass. Yesterday, the ENR committee did move forward, voting ought to pass as amended on LD 1639. This is another carryover bill that the chamber is strongly opposed to. We opposed it in the first session and continue to oppose it. It deals with changing the laws around solid waste processing in the state of Maine. Basically, what happened here was in 2019, there was a law that was passed, LD 401, which the industry, the landfills, and other interested parties had reached an agreement on how to improve recycling rates at a processing facility in Lewiston. Because that agreement was made, that company invested $2 million into their recycling plant. And now 2 years later, the legislature has pulled the rug out from underneath them on that agreement and puts at risk 75 jobs in the Lewiston area. So again, that bill ought to pass as amended out of the ENR committee and now moves forward to the full legislature, where the chamber will be engaged in having our concerns about the legislation being heard. And then one last one that I'd like to highlight that also was passed last week out of the Education Committee unanimously in a bipartisan manner was LD 680. This could create a 20-member task force to study whether a 4-year comprehensive plan for CTE programs in the state would be a good idea if it's feasible for Maine students. So that's a bill that the chamber supported last session. And we'll continue to support as, CTEs are a great pipeline for filling some of the open jobs that we have in the state. And we would welcome any opportunity to be involved in the task force that will be created if LD 607 were to pass.
Clearly, in this phase of our program, there seems to be far more challenges than there are opportunities. But let's look at what lies ahead. What are some of the bills that either have been brought forward by virtue of the strategic plan or that have just been put in that in either instance would help, or as we've just seen in your presentation so far, that would stand in the way? So Pete, I'll go back to you.
Thanks, Dana. It's not so much a bill as the ongoing work of the Paid Family Medical Leave Commission. There is a bill in to extend their reporting period till February of next year. And I knew that was coming. The chair had made it clear that of the commission and they've been meeting through the fall. They've had about a half a dozen meetings. They've gathered information, but what they haven't done is hired an actuary yet to price out what something like this would cost. So to give them the time they need, there's a resolve in to extend their reporting period. I'm sorry, I said February. I believe it's November. At the end of November, they're supposed to produce a report. So we'll be watching that as if we've been watching the commission all along. It's an important issue for this state. I think that the need for leave and childcare, et cetera, has really been highlighted through the pandemic, but it needs to be a workable program for not just the employees, but the worker, the businesses, the employers that have to deal with absent employees in the face of continuing to provide their service, make a product, build a widget, whatever it is. So we're watching that one as it moves forward.
Great. Linda?
In tax, we've got LD 308 that they will be working. That's a carryover bill. It has to do with the research and development tax credit, the R&D tax credit. It doubles the current credit from $25,000 to $50,000. And as we know from Maine strategic plan, innovation is R&D is really key to innovation. And companies are consistently putting more and more money into R&D to improve their products and develop new ones. So that's hugely important as we put more money into R&D. So we're going to be watching that closely as well.
Good. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. I'll start on two issues that we hear consistently that are important for solving some of the workforce challenges, one being childcare and affordable housing. We know that over the summer, there was a commission that was formed to study affordable housing in the state of Maine. They issued a report that was, I believe, 270 something pages long with 9 recommendations. That bill is still in the drafting process. And, we're keeping an eye for when it will be released. Childcare, we know the speaker had LD 1652, which was a carryover bill dealing with workforce development for early childcare workers. The fate of that bill is still unknown, but one that we're waiting to see further legislative action. Shifting back to the EUT committee, there are 3 things that I wanted to highlight. The first being last week, the governor introduced a transmission and distribution utilities accountability bill. This will be by far and away the biggest piece of legislation that the EUT committee will take up this session. It puts forward performance standards that the utilities will need to meet. They'll be graded every quarter. If they fail 2 quarters in a row, the PUC may impose a $1 million fine. And if they continue to not meet the standards, they may be forced to be put up for sale. So one that we're certainly going to keep an eye on as it moves through the committee process. And then LD 1894, which is a bill that had a public hearing last week. Chamber testified in opposition. This bill would create municipal-owned broadband networks for consumer-owned water and electric utilities. There's a lot of problems, unintended consequences that come from that bill. There's no guardrails to protect overbuilding of infrastructure that's already in place, and it also doesn't prioritize unserved areas in the state of Maine, which could put at risk some of the $250 million that we've had invested into Maine from the federal government. So two big issues in the Energy Committee that we'll be keeping a close eye on as they move forward this session.
Yeah, I mean, again, the 3 of you follow a whole lot more items and bills of interest to the chamber, but because of time here, what you've shared with us today and our viewers are just some that they should keep their eye on, that they need to be aware and evaluate it because it does have an impact on our economy. More often it's a challenge and not an opportunity. But there's a couple things I want to, in the time we have left before we move to the next segment, that I want to get your reaction to. One, and I'm going to hand this off to you, Peter. I acknowledged at the very outset that committee structure is really a Zoom presentation, and that the legislature has only been in a couple of days in January. Little was done. That's not a criticism, it's just a fact. And in February, there are 3 scheduled. So there's a lot to do, a lot of bills, but the process has also been one of challenge and has created some real consternation for those who present. Can you share in a little more detail what that is?
Sure. Thanks, Dana. Well, as you pointed out, committees are meeting virtually again this year. Whether that continues to the rest of the legislative session, it's not clear. But the challenges that existed last year remain this year, and that is that the involvement of the average individual and certainly the lobbyists is limited. And they're always limited in a work session in particular, but they're limited particularly in a virtual work session format. And furthermore, there has been in some, but not all committees, the phenomenon of a lack of transparency around, particularly in work sessions, around sharing amendments to bills, and in some cases sharing amendments out of whole cloth in public hearings when the sponsor will come in with a language that replaces the bill that you thought you were testifying on. None of that has been shared necessarily with the public, and certainly not with the lobby. And you're left, trying to figure out how to communicate concerns if you have them, or support if you have them, with that lack of transparency. It was addressed at our leadership summit with some of the legislators that were there, and there was an acknowledgement that they could do better. And the question is, will they, in the time that remains? And we don't know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Thanks, Peter. I also want to throw out to Ben and Linda that this is a little crystal balling, but I'll ask it nevertheless. The governor makes her state of the state this Thursday, and she's indicated that the expectation is that she would be sharing her plan, her proposal for the $822 million supplemental budget. That is revenues that exceeded expectations. For each of you or both of you, give me a sense of what you think will or should appear as a program or a priority or recommendation in that proposal.
I'll take a stab. I think there probably will be something with respect to either income tax or, a return of some of that money to the citizens of Maine. I don't know that, but I'm suspecting that that's going to be part of the deal. Ben?
Yeah, I would, not to sound redundant, but I would anticipate and expect there to be something around the two issues I just highlighted, affordable housing and childcare. I think, we hear consistently from businesses that, everyone's has a workforce shortage going on right now. And two issues that you always hear from businesses are childcare and affordable housing statewide, not just one geographic area, really the whole state. So I would anticipate that the governor would put forward some amount of funding for both of those two issues. What that looks like and what the programs are, I think are still a question mark, but I anticipate that there will be something in the supplemental budget touching on those two topics.
And Dana, if I could just add, the beauty of the affordable housing and the childcare issue is that is bipartisan support. I mean, both sides of the aisle agree those are issues that have really come out during the pandemic that need to be addressed. And the only other thing that I think you would agree to as well is there'll be something in the line of transportation infrastructure as well. That would be my guess. A shovel-ready programs are always popular in the legislature, and there's plenty we know to go around that need to be done here if you've driven in the potholes lately. And it's not even spring in Maine. So
I know. Well, thanks to all three of you. As I often say, I am so grateful that we have the three of you on the chamber team because of your ability, the relationships that you have, and the results that you're able to get. And I'm sure you would echo these same words, is that these are trying times, many challenges, some opportunities, and the role that each and every one of you have out there that are listening and viewing our program today is reach out to your legislator. We've talked about creating coalitions, and that is a way of life to get as many voices as possible, but your voice counts as well. So take advantage of it. You'll see the difference, and that I promise. Thank you, guys. Now let's move to a friend of ours who has been a regular, but lately hasn't been on, no fault of his, that's for sure. Peter Van Allen is that person. He's the editor of Maine Biz. And Peter, welcome. You've had some great articles in Maine Biz of lately, bringing to our attention various aspects of both the challenge and the opportunity. So what have you got for us today?
Thanks, Dana. I appreciate everything you're doing. And your staff is doing such a great job. Really just listening to these issues. And they're so complex, and it kind of, I feel like you've touched on this already in the show, but there's a lot of nuance in everything we're talking about for this year. So Maine Biz had our outlook issue, you can kind of see here. And we basically went to, around 20 different people in different industries and asked them, what are you expecting for this year? And I think, you guys have already sort of touched on this theme in the show so far. There's a lot of pluses and minuses in what's going on, and challenges and opportunities, if you will. So a few of the issues that really have come up that I thought would be of interest to your followers would be, we had a story about how the Bangor office market has been really robust. And this is one of these issues where you think, well, with all these people working remotely, why do they still need office space? But companies still are leasing office space. One of the things that Bev from Epstein Real Estate Group in Bangor had pointed out to our reporter was that, Bangor never overbuilt. We didn't, we never had these situations where, the market was so good that they were building a lot of things that weren't needed, right? So now in a time when you've got all this demand, they're pretty tight. It's a tight market. And I will say too, and this was not in that particular issue, but with the Merida conference recently, that was a real theme. The real estate market is red hot in Maine right now in a lot of different sectors. Another area where we've touched on the industrial marketplace, and that is a marketplace where they're starting to build stuff just because they know people are going to lease it. In other words, on spec. And they're seeing it from the cannabis industry, the craft beer industry, all sorts of different companies who are doing more shipping than they might have done in the past are needing industrial space. The cannabis industry is kind of interesting in itself because that's another one of these areas where we're getting kind of mixed messages. If you're on the real estate side, you're having people saying, they'll pay any price for industrial space. They need industrial space. They use it for growing. They use it for distribution, all kinds of different things. On the retail side of cannabis, and we see these shops, these dispensaries all over Maine, but on the retail side, the sense we had gotten in our outlook issue from talking to different people is they're starting to hit a saturation point. So it's one of these things where it's kind of good news, bad news, because there's still a lot of demand for the real estate, but on the retail side, there may be reaching some saturation. One other issue that we touched on quite a bit in this outlook issue was the hospitality industry. And this is another one where, there's two sides to the coin here. At Acadia National Park, for instance, they had a record visitation in 2021. They had over 4 million visitors, which is, there's no turnstile there, but they're coming in there. And they're expecting even more visitors in 2022. The hospitality, the Tourism Association, and various people in the hospitality industry are gearing up for a big season, but the qualifier is, we'll see what happens with COVID, and if there are travel restrictions, that's going to be a whole different dynamic going on. So there's a lot of, Dana, I think just overall, there's a lot of optimism about this year, but with COVID, there's still a lot of uncertainty, what's going to happen. And there's various things, the way things have just played out in the workplace in the last 2 years that are affecting, the direction of business in Maine.
Well, you said that well, and your examples really did highlight the fact that the COVID has brought to us certain opportunities, certain challenges, but also pluses or opportunities, as you say, because it seems to me that the very examples that you used, whether it's the cannabis industry, Acadia, or the spatial issues that you referenced, all had an impact coming out of COVID or during COVID, in which we saw, while COVID was beneficial to some, particularly those outdoors where you could have the space you needed, whereas in other places, like in the restaurant industry, the COVID created hurdles and challenges in the workforce in particular that really stood in the way of progress. So it is, like you said, it is a kind of a mixed bag. It wasn't all at a loss, but it wasn't all at an opportunity either. So
That's true. Yeah. I mean, you're probably seeing this too, but it seemed like there were a lot of businesses that, maybe the owner was getting ready to retire or sell a business, or, maybe the business wasn't doing that great before COVID. And so there's been there has been that kind of shakeout. And in fact, one of the people that we interviewed for that Outlook issue said, the companies that have survived the past 2 years are the ones with the real serious grit. That was the term she used.
yeah.
And it does, I think, if somebody was ready to kind of get retire or sell a business before COVID definitely convinced them, okay, this is the time to move on. And so we've seen some of that too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's so true. That's a very apt term because Mainers are by nature kind of independent. That's why that entrepreneurial spirit is so alive and well. But Mainers also have grit. And the person who used that term knew what they were talking about, because that was clearly in play during this COVID like we've never seen before. And it really probably accounted for the resilience that we also were witness to during this 2-year period, almost 2-year period. So Peter, as usual, you bring a lot to the show and I greatly appreciate it, and keep up the good work in Maine Biz and bringing forward issues that are of interest to all of us. And we appreciate that. Thanks.
Dana, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Well, as I think about the takeaway for this week, to me, it's more of a reflection of the past almost 2 years. As Peter Van Allen just said, it could be plus and minuses. I could also call it the challenges and the opportunities that we have faced, and frankly, continue to do so. In the first segment, with the help of our advocacy team, we looked at the issues that are in play that help us grow our economy, or those that stand in the way of progress. At the same time, we recognize that COVID has opened some doors for some, but not for everyone. But I will admit that has certainly brought to our state considerable attention that our state is a safe place, but it's also a place that we like to say it's open for business, that opportunity does exist here. But it also tells us in so many different ways the value of having a plan. In this instance, that strategic plan, 10-year plan that was put in place prior to the pandemic, has served us so well. Think of the issues that were highlighted in the first segment, some of the opportunities that is, some of the bills that are before us to help us grow economy. You'll see them as a direct reflection of our strategic plan. And actually, it is the lens through which we should be evaluating the issues that you just heard about, the challenges that stand in the way, and certainly the opportunities that open the door. Peter Van Allen, in our second segment, brought to our attention some really interesting examples of opportunities that are now challenges, that we need to be sure that we can find a way to create opportunities from those challenges. The awareness and the appreciation of what Maine has that other states now know about clearly opens up the doors for some of those opportunities that he shared with us. In Bangor, for example, and I'm sure it's other places, that the office space that has become a rare commodity, the price goes up, but it also opens the door for more investment. And the case can be made in the same way for industrial buildings that are begging for occupancy. Well, truth is, they would love to have the occupancy, but the vacancy rate is so low that they can't accommodate the need. And the same for the warehousing and distribution. It's at an all-time low in terms of what's available and the need is greater than ever. And it's amazing that, not amazing really, because we know how beautiful and what a wonderful national park we have in Acadia. And that 2021, they reached an all-time high, and they expect that to not only match, but exceed in the year we're in. And I also found it fascinating that in the Instagram world that we live in today, that hashtag Acadia is the most sought after and the most popular of all of the national parks. And cannabis, whether it's recreational or medical, you see the retail places almost on every corner. While that's an exaggeration, it's not far from the truth. As a matter of fact, the recreational in 21, I believe, reached 72 million. And in medical cannabis, it was 250 million. Well, all those opportunities that got translated into challenges, as was just expressed, really tell the story of supply and demand, I suppose, because the demand is very high, and it's the availability of space, capacity in one form or another that's a challenge. But it's also remarkable that the COVID gave us a challenge that we've just heard has been turned into an opportunity that's created yet another challenge. And that challenge we need to turn into an opportunity. Some would say that's a wonderful problem to have, and indeed it is, if we remember the lessons that we've learned from the COVID experience in the past 2 years, that you really do need a plan to move forward, a plan like the 10-year strategic plan that we've referenced a number of times. You also need those priorities that come from the plan. And those priorities should be the issues that we put forward in the legislature to be sure that we meet and address the need. The COVID experience has also taught us that the best results come when you make your decisions born out of respect for one another, that relationships truly do matter, and that by working together, you get the job done. Remember, we are in this together. That is the main take for this week. And as we say, as we close out each program, be kind to yourself, but also be kind to one another. Until we see you right back here next week at the same time, enjoy and have a wonderful week. Thank you.